Deep sea divers, what are your horror stories? The only scare I've had is some jackout in a yacht cruising through our dive location at full throttle. You could hear the boat coming for a solid minute or two before it flew over our heads. Our boat had a dive flag on it and we had a buoy with a dive flag on it. They didn't even slow down. Barracuda, sharks, rays, manatees, dolphins. All cool. Humans are way scarier. I work as a paddling coach on lakes. The number of times I've attempted to gesture at a pleasure craft for them to stop, only to have some dude in cargo shorts wave back like an idiot, is higher than I can count. I once had diarrhea at 100 feet. That sucked. It was amazing how warm it made me at depth, but was a nightmare to clean up. I vomited at my own stench, or maybe from the flu. Edit. Thank you for awarding one of the most truly horrible experiences of my life. Some say everything happens for a reason. I now like to think I endured that literal shit show. This happened in front of maybe 20 people, so that years later I would be able to entertain a few anonymous strangers. Night diving is incredibly creepy. You don't realize how dark the ocean is until you are in it. Night diving is possibly the most wonderful thing I've ever experienced. It's somehow relaxing and energizing at the same time. It's so beautiful, like visiting a completely different universe, even more than regular diving. Man, I want to go for a dive now. Free dove to about 160 feet in Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas. It's where a lot of the free diving world records are set. Super neat place. Google a picture. Anyway, I'd never really been past 100 feet free diving, but this was the perfect place to do it. No current. There's ropes to keep you straight and allow a slight pull back up. Scary part is that you become pretty strongly negatively buoyant after like 60 feet. So you're basically hauling ass down while doing nothing and using very little air. So I'm dazed out a bit, feeling good and counting the lines that mark depth, and all of a sudden feel pressure like my trachea is going to collapse, and wake up and realize I've counted to the line that's around 160 feet or so. Very scary moment because I wasn't sure if my body could take the depth or if I had gone too far and wouldn't have enough air to get back up, which is a much slower and more air intensive process. I wear heavy prescription lenses and can't wear contact lenses. Halfway through a week-long liveaboard dive trip, someone dropped a tank on my prescription mask and shattered it. I usually had a second set with me, but could not find them and only brought one. Because hey, nothing had ever happened before. I am functionally blind without corrective lenses. I can see colors and that's about it. Starting about 5 inches from my face. I was devastated, but decided to go diving anyway. With my husband as my seeing eye diver, I could see my gauges, so I felt reasonably safe. It was among the most amazing 3 days of diving I've ever had. I saw the colors, shapes, and movement without being focused on the details. I actually took many of the best underwater photos I'd ever taken. I wasn't worried about focusing on a particular coral or fish. I was looking at the larger color patterns. So it didn't turn out to be the disaster I'd thought it was. Not my story, but my parents. They like to scuba dive when traveling and have gone several times over the years. Once they visited Mexico and went diving there before I was born. I'm not sure where they were exactly, but my mom was slightly lower down than my dad and looking at the ocean floor. He was looking up and around. My mom had on a gold necklace that was floating in the water around her. It was a sunny day and a fairly shallow dive, so it was sparkling. From my mom's POV, she was going along having a grand old time looking at the sea critters below, when suddenly my dad grabbed her and started frantically shaking her arm to get her attention. She looked up and a barracuda was directly in front of her, closer than was comfortable and staring intently. Scary teeth on full display. It was focused on the shiny necklace and was just hovering there, transfixed. She slowly moved up her hand to cover the necklace and they slowly and calmly moved away from it and it took off without bothering them anymore. But still pretty unsettling and taught my mom to be a little more aware of her surroundings when diving. My biology teacher told us that she once was swimming in the south of the Philippines because she was trying to find an elusive seahorse, and she went quite deep at night when they are more active, and she got attacked by a shark and her team got out fast. The next day they found a turtle that was bitten in half, shell included, that was pretty big, and it's supposedly the last time she went diving in that area. Sounds like a tiger shark. One of my diving instructors had a scary as hell story about diving on a reef and having a large one charge her out of nowhere. She turned before it hit and it bumped her air tank as it veered to the side. Needless to say, she fell as soon as she could after that. Not me, but my brother. And not deep sea. Sorry. He was 18. Part of the dive club at his school. They went on a diving trip. The crew that handled the dive counted heads wrong, and halfway through the dive the boat went back to shore without them. So there they were 2 kilometers from shore with their only option to swim back. There were about 5 of them. 2 girls, 3 guys. All of them between 15 and 18 YO. About halfway through, one of the girls couldn't swim anymore and started crying. My brother along with another guy swam with her, dragging her along, making sure she didn't drown. Everyone made it out okay. Worst part, school tried to hide it and had the audacity to suspend my brother from school for catching him with a beer while on the trip. Needless to say, they were in deep shit when it came out. Not sure exactly what happened though. Honestly, the things that really scare me, makes my heart run fast, etc. 2. 1. If my air consumption looks funky, suggesting a leak, or the current is suddenly fast. Basically anything that could lead to a life-threatening issue due to running out of air. When you're deep, you can't just fly back up and be fine. 2. Hurting reefs. Like honestly, if my hand brushes against one, even dead, or gets super close so the dust unsettles because of the current or something, I feel so guilty. I'm hardly a deep sea diver. My deepest dive to date is 111. This incident actually happened in about 8 feet of water. Crystal River, Florida. Known for attracting manatees in the winter. They don't let you scuba dive there anymore. And the dive master suggested snorkeling this dive because it was shallow and it scares the manatees off. It was my first set of dives out of certification. I was putting my gear on, damn it. So there's 2 manatees in the immediate area. An older juvenile who was hanging out and loving the attention from the snorkelers. And what we assumed was likely his mother. I had a little disposable underwater camera. As soon as I hit the bottom, the big one approached me. I moved the camera out of my face and she just got closer and closer until she literally grabbed the regulator out of my mouth. Luckily my skills were still very fresh in my mind and I calmly grabbed my octo. But I spent the entire dive trying to get far enough away to get pictures of her. She was a nosy pest. Diving at Gordon Rocks in the Galapagos. We had hoped to see hammerhead sharks that frequent the area. This is a pinnacle surrounded by deep water and strong currents. Our guide had us hold onto the rocks and wait to see who came by. While we were waiting, a group of 10 reef sharks were circling above us while 2 lager moray eels were popping their heads out a few feet away, opening their mouths letting us know they mean business. Needless to say, I was a bit nervous and burning through my air at a rapid rate. Suddenly a group of dozen hammerhead sharks came into view. We had not really discussed what we would do. The guide motioned for us to follow and the next thing I know we are swimming with the school of sharks. This only lasted a few minutes before they broke away from the group. We began to move into our safety stop zone where currents were pushing us in different directions when I suddenly ran out of air. You don't get much warning when suddenly there is nothing left. So here I am 15 feet or so underwater, unable to reach my partner's secondary air, being forced to surface when I should still be chilling. At least the second time I ran out of air was user error on my wife's part, anniversary dive, and I was able to get to the secondary air and get back to the surface safely. Oh, and then there was the time diving Bloody Bay Wall in the Caymans where there is a 5,000 foot drop and my partner was nassed out and kept going deeper, nearly exceeding the recreational limit of 120 feet or so. If I had not grabbed her, she might still slowly be falling into the abyss. Diving is super fun. TLDR, I fell asleep while diving. The weather had been pretty hot and the water temp was also around 26°C. We'd done a dive and a long swim in the morning. We then headed out for our second dive and the boat dropped us in the wrong spot. So we had to swim against a massive current to get to our intended site. Halfway into the swim I just felt like I needed a nap. And so, I closed my eyes and did exactly that. It felt so peaceful. I immediately dropped down to an even deeper depth and was lucky that one of the guys on the dive turned around at that moment and saw what was happening. He swam as fast as he could towards me and caught me. He asked if I was okay. I said I was and passed out again. This time spitting my reg out and started blowing bubbles. He then went behind me, shoved my reg back in, wrapped his arms around me and took me straight to the surface. He saved my life. I was diving in the early 90s off the coast of Florida. I had been using a spearfish ineffectually for a few minutes when I heard a strange grinding noise to my right. I turned my head to see an enormous set of barracuda jaws grinding just inches from my face. I still recall the fish's eye rotating around to check me out as if considering it should take a bite or not. Only thing that really scares me is lung expansion injuries. So the one time I was freaked out was swimming near a wreck at about 100 feet. I lost perspective and buoyancy control and suddenly realized I had surfaced about 40 feet in 30s or less. Visions of the bends and a popped lung instantly came to mind and dropped a ton of air from my BC to get back to depth in a hurry. Got a massive squeeze from it in my ears. But it gave me a chance to calm the FCK down and get a better sense of where I was and re-establish buoyancy control. Bottom line, the scariest things that can happen while driving is the shit you can do to yourself. I was diving with a mom, her husband, and their son on a night dive. IDK how many dives they've been on, but the mom for some reason decided to just go up without signaling anyone why. She did a thumbs up signal, which means she needs to go up, and when the dive instructor signaled back asking why she just went up. So the guide is trying to get her to come down when a boat comes across and runs her right over. I forget the exact size of the boat, but it was big dual motor. Blood was everywhere and we had to rush out because there were a lot of sharks in the area. She died instantly, I assume. I didn't see much once we surfaced as I was busy vomiting from everything. Edit. I realize I worded this poorly, so I reworded it. Not exactly a horror story, but that one time as we were circling a reef I saw a huge eye that belonged to something buried in a sand. We just looked at each other as I passed by. I can tell it was definitely curious but non-aggressive. Had a weird feeling afterwards. Wasn't deep sea and wasn't diving, snorkeler for life. Man. Was in the reef off the coast of Belize. Super calm area. Known for its shallow, impossibly clear, bathtub temperature waters. You know in Finding Nemo, the drop off? It's real. It's hard to see until you're right at it. But the current changes and suddenly you're getting thrown around by currents and waves. I get body slammed into a coral. They're sharp moth earthkers. Had a spear with me cause it was lobster season and I basically stuck it in the sand and climbed up it like a flagpole just to get a couple feet above the coral so I could kick like hell and get back to the calm part so I can surface without getting sucked out. The scariest part is realizing the kayak tied to the marker buoy is suddenly a good 100 yards away and you don't even realize you've drifted that far in only a couple minutes. Anyway. Have a neat scar from the coral all over my hip and thigh that I always have to tell people is not road rash. A living undersea rock shivved me when I was too stupid to wear a wetsuit. It seemed silly. The water is 25 degrees. Close bracket. Was doing a boat dive and came up to find 20-foot swells. We just had to chill for a while down under until the boat would calm down and we could actually grab the ladder without getting smashed. I remember seeing the ladder going up and down 6-8 feet at a time. I finally grabbed the rope and climbed up as fast as I could. I hung onto the ladder and the boat crew grabbed my BCD and hauled me out of the water and onto the swim step. Half the divers puked on the way back into port. That was the roughest conditions that I have ever been diving in. I got the bends once. I was careful. Followed my charts and my computer. Had appropriate depths and surface time. But I didn't drink enough water, so I was all out of whack. Felt fine until I got home. Mild headache. Then I woke up and it was just pain in my left arm. Elbows. Fingers. Couldn't even bend them without bad pain. My headache was intense and I was so dizzy. Called my older, more experienced dive buddy and I got rushed to the hospital. Docs got me hooked up and fluids. Checked my dive logs while the decompression chamber was set up. And then got me in there with a nurse. 8 hours in a tube about the length of a car but as wide as maybe a double bed. I was on oxygen and hooked up to an IV and it was so loud. With all the air rushing in. As soon as I got to depth the pain vanished. It was crazy. I'm fine now obviously. But I wasn't allowed to dive for a month, which sucked, but hey. The dives were pretty great. It wasn't exactly a deep dive. But it was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I was on a beach dive with my parents. Having swum from the beach out to a small reef and then descending. It was only a few minutes after getting down to the reef that something started going on with my parents. My mother was agitated and clutching her chest. We surfaced and she started spitting up dark liquid and struggling to breathe. Fortunately, it was a busy beach and after we inflated an emergency buoy, lifeguards rushed out and carried her back to the shore where an ambulance waited. It turned out she'd had swimmer's edema induced by the greater pressure. Things turned out fine. But having a medical emergency underwater in the ocean is especially level of scary. I was diving under an oil rig between Long Beach and Catalina Island. I was collecting sea scallops at around 60 feet or so, and knowing that there were seals all around, I always kept an eye out for sharks. You just can't help but think about them. So I was just about to finish my dive, but I was looking for one more scallop for dinner and I saw a blur swoosh right by me just in front of my face. My initial immediate reaction was shock. But it was just a damn seal playing with me. I literally was screaming underwater for a couple of seconds. Funny thing is, I have over 25 logged open water dives. Some at night. Mostly around Catalina, and I never saw a shark. I wear contacts, so getting water in my mask is extra bad as I can't open my eyes underwater. Shortly after being told about a shark colliding with my friend from behind and removing his mask, I am pretty scared about this, not sharks in general. And I see a shark heading for me. They are curious. They often shoulder bump you as they turn at the last second. But she wasn't changing course. I stayed calm and still as long as I could, and at the last second before she hit my mask I ducked. Except instead of ducking under, I just headbutted her right in the nose. Everyone saw and thinks it was the funniest thing ever. I may be the only person alive who headbutted an 11-foot shark in the nose, but it was because I was scared she would take my goggles off. Not deep sea diver. One time I dove with my dad during a tropical storm. Once you get 10 feet down it's not bad. One of my last dives I had an asthma attack 45 feet down. I was with 20 other people including my bestie. So that far down and can't rapidly ascend. They got me to concentrate on my breathing and slow it down the best I could. I just listened to the bubbles and that helped. Finished the dive and then my bestie ran out of there and did an emergency ascent on the same dive. Not terrible, but in the moment it was a bit scary. I was with a group at a coral reef. Some of them were spearing lionfish. I watched. Personally, I don't like killing things, since they're invasive and hurt the corals. The dive resort cooks any that are caught and gives them to do. As my buddy was cutting the spines off of one, I saw shark's outline in the distance. Luckily it swam in the opposite direction. But with half my dive party, 10 plus, spearing the fish, I was afraid it would attract some and wanted friends. Obligatory, not my story, but a friend's. He works as an underwater welder. He learned it in the Navy. The guy makes bank, and one time he was working on an oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico. They were sending pipe down in sections and him and his co-worker were to secure it as it was being brought down, move it into place and weld the sections together. His co-worker was the one receiving the section that was coming down, and somehow he must have lost his bearings on where he was because he was standing in an area he wasn't supposed to. Even though he realized his mistake at the last second and tried to get out of the way, he couldn't move fast enough and the pipe section fell right on top of him. He did not survive the accident. If it's any consolation, my friend told me that the guy didn't drown. The incident report stated that the impact from the pipe killed him, so he didn't suffer. Not mine. But my brother was a master scuba dive instructor and his best friend was an ex-Navy SEAL. They went out on a wall dive one day and my brother's friend committed suicide on the dive. He just kept swimming down and disappeared. My brother chased him down as far as he could go, then did his decompression stops on the way up, and sat in the boat the rest of the day waiting to see if he'd surface. He never did. My brother went into shore, reported what had happened and was arrested for murder. He spent the night in jail and we had to bribe the police the next day to get him out. We drove him to the airport and he fled the country, never to return. That was over 20 years ago, and he's never been in the water since. I was on a night dive looking for a resident 6-gill shark when a large grey animal darted past me, just barely illuminated by my light. It was way faster than I was told the shark would be and I couldn't quite make out the size. Then it happened again on the other side. Both times it was in my peripheral vision, barely illuminated by my forward aimed spotlight, and very fast. For some reason when I got to the bottom, I decided just to sit on my knees and aim the light in one direction until something happened. As it turned out, the beast was a harbor seal using the light to find fish to eat. She hung out with us for a while, which was a pretty cool experience. We never found the shark, but I did think I was being hunted for a bit. My craziest experience was diving with my father and cousin. We were searching for lobster in the cracks and crevices of huge rocks. My cousin signaled to come over and pointed in a dark hole. I shine my light in and here is a huge lobster stuck in what looked like the back. I sunk my arm shoulder deep into the hole and triumphantly pull out the biggest damn lobster I have ever seen to this day, as we're celebrating with silent underwater gestures of enthusiasm. Not one but two moray coming popping out of the very hole. I'll also never forget diving with my father and running into black sea bass larger than a small car. It wasn't scary, but I was aware this fish looked big enough to try to eat me. This will probably get buried, but I once had a mash squeeze hole lobster diving at night where I burst a blood vessel in my eye and my mask filled up with blood. It was pitch black and all I could see was red in my eyes through the glow of my light. Eventually I was able to flush my mask enough to clear the blood and get back to bagging lobster. I hit bag limit too. I do underwater constitution for a living and my scariest moment was when I was trying to rig up a concrete slab that was a couple £1,000 to get picked out of the water by a crane. It started to tip over while I was working on it and I had to jump out of the way quickly to avoid it falling on me. When it fell, it landed right on my dive hose that supplies me air from the surface. Luckily the force of it hitting the ground broke the slab and I was able to shimmy my dive hose between the pieces with a lot of effort. This all happened about 70 feet from surface.